DW Inside Europe.
Hello and welcome. I'm Nick Martin in Germany. On today's programme, he's done it many times before, so will Putin use the Moscow theatre attack to further tighten his grip?
The most natural way is to tighten the legislation, to increase the level of repression, to increase the level of restrictions on civil society.
What if a pro-Western candidate wins Slovakia's presidential election? And the latest on the refugee crisis in Europe that no one is talking about.
Важным моментом является то, что азербайджанская власть не собиралась...
Armenians from Nagorno Karabakh were forced to become refugees because Azerbaijan was not willing to give them any rights as an ethnic minority.
Those stories and more coming up on the programme. After the attack on a Moscow theatre last week that killed at least 143 people, 4 men arrested over the atrocity were paraded on Russian TV, showing visible signs of beating. One appeared in court in a wheelchair. An affiliate of the self-proclaimed Islamic State group claimed responsibility, but that hasn't stopped the Kremlin from blaming Ukraine for the attack without evidence. The killing spree was the worst on Russian soil by any group since the 2004 Beslan school siege, which claimed the lives of more than 330 people. Russian President Vladimir Putin has regularly used terror attacks to cement his authority. So the obvious question, as he begins his 5th term, is will he do it again, and how? I asked Sergei Davidis, head of the Political Prisoners Support Programme at Russia's Memorial Human Rights Center, what action Putin has taken before.
We all remember the case of attack on Beslan when Putin cancelled governors' elections in Russia, and there were no governors' elections at all for 10 years, and later they returned them in a very limited form. For sure, there was no connection between terrorist attack and governors' elections. But this attack was used as an excuse for this change. If you speak about other terrorist attacks, they were used as a pretext of tightening criminal legislation, mainly. They introduced new articles into criminal code. They increased punishment intentionally and formally, provided worse conditions for those who are sentenced for terrorist crimes, and so on. But we should understand that accusations of terrorist nature are used not only against those who had committed terrorist attacks, but against many who just support Ukraine, for example, publicly support Ukraine, and they are charged with justification of terrorism or calls for terrorism.
So, Sergei, what about after this attack? How is Putin going to use this atrocity for his own ends?
We can foresee that now they somehow will react the same way. Actually, now we have such a situation in the country that Putin do not have any special excuses to tighten the grip over the country. But since they failed to prevent such a terrible terrorist attack, they will have to answer somehow. The most natural way to answer is to tighten the legislation, to increase the level of repression, to increase the level of restrictions on civil society.
And some Kremlin officials have even spoken about bringing back the death penalty, which was effectively abolished by Boris Yeltsin in the 1990s. Is that likely?
They speak about the return of capital punishment, and formally it exists in Russian criminal code, but there is a moratorium. It is not so simple thing as just to introduce new punitive law. But for sure, if they really want to do it, it's possible to do it. It seems so that it's a discussable idea, but not a decision to return to death penalty. But actually, they have so many instruments to suppress civil society that they do not have special need in death penalty. But since they should demonstrate their severeness as a response to terrorist attack, probably they will return death penalty, but it cannot be said for sure now.
And Sergei, just take us through those that would likely be the main victims of any toughening of sentences and any other further crackdown by Putin.
Everybody who has already been subjected to prosecution can be affected and probably will be affected. We can foresee that the level of tolerance to dissenters will be further decreased. Everybody who dare to oppose the regime will be more in risk than they are today, especially migrants from Central Asia. We can foresee that those who are charged with terrorist crimes can face further deterioration of their situation.
I think many were shocked to see those arrested in connection with the attack being paraded on TV with very visible signs of being beaten and possibly tortured. Were you surprised that the Kremlin decided to do this so publicly?
The tortures themselves are now already very well practiced, especially in terrorist cases and cases investigated by Federal Security Service, but they deny tortures. And it was the first case when the authorities publicly confessed to torture the suspects. It's something new, and it's a very dangerous sign because it changed the norm, social and public norm. It's a message sent to all the law enforcement bodies that it's quite normal to torture people. The level of tortures and the number of cases where we could see tortures was growing, especially after the beginning of full-scale war. And now the next step on this way is to make them public, something that they should not conceal.
And finally, Sergei, can we look at this from another direction? Is there a chance that Putin, who of course has just been re-elected for a fifth term, will be weakened by this attack?
Putin doesn't depend on public opinion too much. He forms public opinion, at least public presentation of public opinion, I would say so. Probably a quarter of the Russian population who know that he is a dictator, but they have to be mostly silent because there is no possibility to speak out against the regime without being taken into custody. So probably the level of support will somehow slightly decrease, this artificial construction of support. But they try to somehow compensate it by these cruel measures. And I don't think that this action can be considered as something which is somehow sufficient threat for Putin's grip of power.
And I was talking there to Sergei Davidis from Russia's Memorial Human Rights Center. Now to Slovakia, where the country's presidential election produced something of a surprise last weekend, with a stronger than expected first-round result for former Foreign Minister Ivan Korčok. The second-round runoff in a week's time will be against Parliament Chair Peter Pellegrini, a member of Robert Fico's populist nationalist government. Rob Cameron looks ahead to the vote and what's at stake.
Ivan Korčok celebrating a surprise 42% showing in the first round of Slovakia's presidential election, beating by 5 points the nearest challenger and setting up a clash with the candidate of the Fico government. Korčok, a seasoned diplomat and pro-Western liberal, promises to act as a counterweight to Fico's cabinet, a coalition of populist, nationalist and leftist parties which has gleefully set about unpicking Slovakia's criminal justice system and public media, to the alarm of both the centre-right opposition and some in the West. Grigory Mesezhnikov, a political scientist and veteran observer of Slovak public life, says his country once again stands at a crossroads.
Yeah, I think that these elections, they are exceptionally important because the country is now passing through the process of gradual dismantling of some crucial elements of liberal democracy and changing in our foreign policy orientation. We have the government of pro-Russian national populists and Peter Pellegrini. He is representing this trend. He is part of this ruling coalition. He is Speaker of Parliament. He was very active, I would say very proactive, in taking all these legislative changes, adopting these very strange amendments. And if he will be elected as a president, I think that the chances to secure democracy will be worse.
Ukraine is likely to play a major role ahead of the second round on April the 6th. Mr. Pellegrini, with the rather lukewarm support of Prime Minister Fico, the two men enjoy a cool relationship, is already attempting to portray his opponent as a warmonger who would send Slovak boys off to fight in a foreign conflict. Mr. Korchok pointed out that the president has no power to send troops anywhere. That's a competence enjoyed solely by the government, with the express approval of parliament. He says if elected, he'll restore Slovakia's international reputation, a reputation that he says has been shredded in less than 6 months by the Moscow-leaning populist Fico government. Not everyone, however, is convinced Robert Fico really cares that much who wins in a week's time. Some believe Mr. Pellegrini's Hlas party will be weakened either way and could be gobbled up by Mr. Fico's Smer. Pavel Shturba is a foreign news reporter at the daily Denik N.
Some people say Mr. Pellegrini wins or he doesn't win, Fico will be happy. If Mr. Pellegrini wins the elections, maybe Fico's Smer can absorb the party without Pellegrini, because without Mr. Pellegrini, the party don't make much sense, to be honest. And if Mr. Korchok wins and Mr. Pellegrini loses, that's a very similar scenario, because Mr. Pellegrini's party will become less important. And thirdly, maybe Mr. Fico needs an enemy in the presidential palace.
Others dismiss that as insider baseball. They say it will matter hugely who wins the keys to Bratislava's presidential palace. A Pellegrini victory will cement Fico's grip on power and allow him to continue his project of creating an illiberal Slovakia modelled on Viktor Orban's Hungary. Slovak officials will speak in one voice on Ukraine, and the language will be increasingly to Moscow's liking. And populist pro-peace forces elsewhere in Europe could be emboldened. For DW, this is Rob Cameron in Prague.
Still to come on Inside Europe, refugees who fled Nagorno Karabakh say they hope to return home someday. DW keeps you updated with the latest from across Europe. You can stay in touch by visiting our website, dw.com, or checking out DW Europe's social media pages. I'm Nick Martin in Germany. You're listening to Inside Europe. Armenia, in the South Caucasus, is taking steps to avoid another war with neighbouring Azerbaijan. Last fall, Azerbaijan launched a military operation into the disputed region of Nagorno Karabakh and retook control of the territory from the ethnic Armenians who lived there. More than 100,000 people fled their homes in Nagorno-Karabakh to nearby Armenia. And as Levi Bridges reports, the ongoing humanitarian crisis caused by the influx of refugees is having ripple effects across Europe.
Azerbaijan managed to take over Nagorno-Karabakh last September in just a couple days of fighting. In a video shot during the campaign, air raid sirens blare and gunshots ring out in the distance. The region, which until recently was populated by ethnic Armenians, was incorporated into Azerbaijan during the Soviet Union. Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh formed their own independent government after the Soviet Union fell, but the region is still internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan. In recent years, Azerbaijan retook large swaths of the region through military force. Last September, Azerbaijan's forces succeeded in reaching Stepanakert, the local capital, and regained control of the entire region for the first time in 30 years. A local Armenian woman in Stepanakert sent me a video she took just days after the city fell to Azerbaijan. Walking past a fire burning in the street, she gets emotional because this might be one of the last times she'll ever see this neighborhood where she lived. Nearly the entire population of ethnic Armenians who previously lived in Nagorno-Karabakh have fled into nearby Armenia. Okay. I spoke over Zoom with one Armenian woman named Ruzana Tavadyan, who settled outside Armenia's capital, Yerevan. Tavadyan says when Azerbaijan launched the military assault, she took refuge in a basement for days. She and her 2 children eventually fled their home with just the clothes on their backs. They got a ride out of the region in the back of a large truck. Tavadyan's daughter shot a video of the trip on her cell phone. You can see long lines of traffic backed up as thousands of people tried to escape to Armenia. Tavadyan says seeing all these people leaving was awful to witness.
Our people have suffered so much. We ended up without a roof over our heads, with nothing. Now we've lost our homeland, and you can never find a new homeland. That's impossible.
Azerbaijan has said that Armenians are welcome to stay in Nagorno Karabakh. They're not forcing anyone to leave. But Alyesa Vartanyan, a senior research analyst for the South Caucasus with the International Crisis Group, says ethnic Armenians in the region are afraid to live under Azerbaijan's government.
People started panicking because people thought that now Azerbaijani forces were to enter their towns, villages, and massacres would start happening.
Vartanyan says that Azerbaijan's military committed crimes against Armenian civilians in Nagorno Karabakh during a 44-day conflict both sides fought back in 2020. Many of those incidents were never investigated, even though dozens were filmed on cell phones and posted on the internet. So thousands fled to nearby Armenia because they believed Azerbaijani soldiers might harm them again. The timing of these events couldn't have been worse.
Armenia has been really struggling to handle the refugee crisis because almost immediately after people arrived from Nagorno-Karabakh, the war started in Israel and Gaza, and finances that otherwise could be available, they were diverted to a different place.
The lack of resources has caused deep frustration among displaced Armenians. Matakse Hakabyan is a politician from Nagorno-Karabakh who was also displaced.
Both the Armenian government and the international community have been indifferent to the needs of Armenian refugees. Nobody came to help defend Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. Our ancestors told us about the Armenian genocide in 1915, and now our generation is experiencing these same events firsthand.
Armenians are also frustrated because the EU signed a memorandum to buy gas from Azerbaijan to wean itself off Russian energy. Many EU lawmakers oppose doing business with Azerbaijan, saying the country's human rights record is so poor that it's not better than doing business with Russia. But Gligor Radicic with the environmental NGO Bankwatch Network says large state-owned utilities and private companies usually make the final decision on whether to buy gas from Azerbaijan.
And for companies, it's like lucrative enough, they will stay within those deals. I mean, I don't believe that they are that much concerned with the human rights issues, unfortunately.
The EU's gas deal with Azerbaijan also hasn't fully achieved its goal of cutting revenue to Russia from energy sales. Russian energy company Lukoil owns large stakes in Azerbaijan's energy infrastructure, including the gas pipeline that transports oil to the EU. Radicic notes that Lukoil is a major taxpayer in Russia.
And those revenues also can go to the state budget of the Russia, and that can implicitly go to the Russian war efforts in Ukraine.
But so far, gas is still flowing out of Azerbaijan, and its citizens are moving to parts of Nagorno Karabakh that Armenians fled. In a video posted on YouTube, soldiers and officials from Azerbaijan's government are seen holding a victory parade in the region's capital. It's a moment of celebration in an authoritarian country that has severely limited the rights of citizens and cracked down on any form of opposition. Ahmad Mamadli, an activist from Azerbaijan, says the country's political environment is part of the reason why Azerbaijan's government has no interest in allowing Armenians to stay in Nagorno Karabakh.
Важным моментом является то, что азербайджанская власть не собиралась давать им какие-то...
Armenians from Nagorno Karabakh were forced to become refugees because Azerbaijan was not willing to give them any rights as an ethnic minority, because if they'd given Armenians any freedoms, then Azerbaijanis would also have demanded their rights.
But still, many displaced Armenians who I spoke with say they firmly believe that they will return to their homes someday.
Я бы даже через год вернулась бы, честное слово.
Rusana Tevadyan, the mother who recently became a refugee in Armenia, says she wants to go home so badly that she would agree to any conditions Azerbaijan might require if it meant she could return. But Nare Semanyan, an Armenian from Nagorno Karabakh who lives in Yerevan now, says it would be hard going back because the town where she grew up was decimated by fighting.
The building we were living is destroyed fully, and I would prefer not to see my town in that situation.
But the destruction hasn't erased the importance of Nagorno Karabakh for Armenians. Simonyan sent me an old video of her family singing in the woods by their former home. For many Armenians, all that remains of their homes now are memories of the moments they shared there together, and the dream that they can someday return.
Levi Bridges, DW.
And now it's time for our Spotify question of the week, which has an Easter theme. For most people, Easter is associated with Christian customs, eating chocolate eggs or hot cross buns. But in one European nation, there is an Easter tradition to read books or watch TV shows about crime stories. So we're asking this week, which country is that? Is it Ireland, Italy or Norway? Head over to Spotify to tell us your answer. Now, Inside Europe is just one of DW's regular audio shows. We also have a new culture podcast that you might want to check out. It's called Don't Drink the Milk. And here's a little taster of what you can hear.
Don't Drink the Milk. Weird name for a podcast, right? But it will all make sense, I promise. And no, it's not a podcast about milk. If you like historical intrigue, a bit of culture, and a sprinkling of controversy, this one's for you.
The arguments of homeopathy are based on sand, and the sand was pouring through my fingers.
I'm Rachel Stewart, and for this new podcast from DW, I'm travelling around Europe, tracing the backstories of objects, ideas, and movements that you know well. But maybe you never really stopped to think how these things got to you.
Condoms are known as French letters in the 19th century. Syphilis is the French disease, but in France it's the Italian disease.
Join us to follow the strange journeys of these everyday things and see how they change shape as they're exported through time and around the world, by force, by chance, or by choice. No need to pack your bags, just subscribe to Don't Drink the Milk wherever you listen to podcasts.
And because of our correspondents all over the continent, Inside Europe is able to bring you the latest political, social and cultural developments. So please remember to subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get in touch with your feedback. Tell us what you like and what else we could be covering. Drop a line to insideeurope@dw.com. This is Inside Europe, and I'm Nick Martin in Germany. This is Inside Europe, and I'm Nick Martin in Germany. In the next half hour, Orban's woes worsen as a secret recording hints at more corruption at the heart of Hungary's government. Is it time's up for Spain's late-night bar culture?
The dome has been reshaped to host offices of organizations that work for social change.
We step out here, and in the middle of the cupola, there was a tower.
Correct.
One guard, in theory, could watch everybody.
Yeah, now there is a cinema, which is amazing.
And after keeping offenders off the streets for more than 100 years, dome-shaped prisons in the Netherlands have been remodeled for the 21st century.
On the one hand, it's a good idea to improve the situation of workers who are working until late. On the other hand, I think that all of us enjoy going out until late. It's something that it's really part of our heritage.
From the studios of Germany's international broadcaster, DW, this is Inside Europe.
First, there was the child sex abuse scandal, which took down Hungary's president and the country's justice minister. Now, Peter Magyar, the ex-husband of that minister, has published a recording where his former spouse appears to incriminate Prime Minister Viktor Orban's closest allies in a new corruption affair. Magyar says the tape shows that Orban's cabinet chief tampered with prosecution files in a high-profile bribery case. For more on how ordinary Hungarians are reacting to the revelations, I spoke to Stefan Boss, DW's correspondent in Budapest.
Yes, Nick, they actually gathered thousands of them initially in front of the chief prosecutor's office. Some are shouting now, go to prison, when they speak about Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban and Chief Prosecutor Peter Polt, a close ally. These people here, including young and elderly Hungarians, want them to go. The crowd swelled as they later marched to a square near the Parliament building here in Budapest. And of course, that was quite interesting to see. Now, former government insider Peter Magyar called the demonstration after he leaked an audio clip that he recorded with his then wife Judith Varga. This is how that sounded. In the recording, two people are heard talking about the investigation into a Kraft case involving Varga's former deputy. Magyar claims it contains proof that Antal Rogan, he was the minister of the Prime Minister's cabinet office, and his staff manipulated investigative records. Sure, they struck themselves out, the woman purported to be Varga can be heard saying in the recording, and she apparently made a reference to Rogan and his staff.
Now, Stefan, has Judith Varga, and a reminder that she was the former justice minister, has she reacted to these accusations that she knew about the corruption cases but didn't act?
Well, she has issued a written statement on social media saying that Magyar had been involved in domestic violence against her and basically pressured her into saying things. She said he read rumors in the press, and since he had been terrorizing me for days, I said what he wanted to hear so that I could get out as soon as possible. That at least what she wrote on her official Facebook page. Now, she also alleged Magyar used the recording to blackmail her.
So for Magyar, who released this recording and has recently launched his own political movement against Orban's government, how damaging are these accusations made by his former wife of domestic violence?
Magyar has denied the accusations, saying he only made the recording after his now ex-wife informed him that Orban's inner circle was, quote, a mafia government that is impossible to get out of. Now, of course, he made that also clear when speaking to protesters. He tells the demonstrators that the rally is a protest of the whole nation, which says enough is enough. Magyar makes clear that they will not remain silent about what he calls the biggest political, moral and legal scandals of the last 30 years since Hungary turned into a democracy from years of communism. Magyar also accuses the Orbán government of covering up scandals ranging from pedophile crimes to corrupt executives and corrupt government members who, he says, steal hundreds of billions of forints from taxpayers.
And finally, Stefan, we have come to know Orbán over the years as a political survivor. But how badly could this damage his prospects as leader of Hungary?
Orbán is a political veteran and a phenomenal political chess player, yet with pressure mounting and questions raised within his party, it remains unclear, I think, how long he will be able to stay in power. It also comes ahead of European elections that he hoped would lead to his right-wing Fidesz party gaining more seats in the EU's parliament and other like-minded parties. So much will depend on whether the protests will gain momentum and whether the opposition will unite, as internal divisions have often split it.
Our correspondent in Budapest, Stefan Boss there. Now, one of the most attractive aspects of Spain's culture is its late nightlife. Spanish people tend to do everything later than the rest of us in Europe. The main dinner time is around 9 p.m, and that's just at home. It's even later if you go to restaurants, especially at the weekend. And if you want a late night drink with friends, there's no need to rush. Most bars in the city centre will still be in full flow come midnight. But could all that be about to change? The government is kicking around ideas of bringing Spanish nightlife more in line with other European countries. So what do locals and tourists feel about this? Ashish Sharma has been finding out.
Well, it's not very often that Inside Europe is going to allow me to make a report from inside a bar. But well, in the interest of news, one has to do what one can. But in all seriousness, bars and restaurants have recently been the talking point here in Spain. And that's because Yolanda Díaz, the Labour Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, wants them to shut early. Well, she's been arguing that Spain's late-night culture isn't good for the health of the population, nor is constantly working late-night hours good for mental health. But is such a change possible here in Spain? A late-night lifestyle is ingrained in the Spanish psyche. So I'm going to pop into my local, which stays open till about 1 in the morning, even during weekdays, to find out what Spanish people and tourists think of the idea.
Well, in fact, I think that on one hand, it's a good idea to improve the situation of workers who are working until late, to have a good balance between their private life and their work. But on the other hand, I think that it's not useful here in Spain due to our culture, because, you know, all of us enjoy going out until late. It's something that it's really part of our heritage. So we start having dinner maybe at 9 p.m. and it can continue until 11. So no, I don't think it's so profitable here.
Well, amongst the tourists that are here today is actually a couple from Germany who have just told me that they went to see a Depeche Mode concert. Now, obviously you enjoy a bit of the evening and social life. First of all, how different is the social life in terms of bars and pubs closing in Germany compared to what you've experienced in Spain?
Yeah, we think in Germany the bars close too early and we can't enjoy the lifetime behind the concert, and so we love the life here in Spain to go in bars and take a drink.
So that said, maybe you're not aware of this, but one of Spain's top politicians is suggesting that in fact the bars in Spain should close at the same time as in other European countries. As tourists, do you think that's going to be a disaster for Spain?
Yes, I think so. That's a disaster. Because
We are here and live the Spanish life. And we want this. Yesterday we was in a concert from Depeche Mode, and after the concert we go to a bar, yes, and it's open and it's very good.
In Germany, is it not possible? We like it.
The perception of tourists is very important. Spain is one of the most visited countries in the world, and revenues from tourism are one of the pillars of the Spanish economy, contributing almost 12% of the country's GDP. That amounted to over 155 billion euros in 2023. Well, I've just popped into the Mercado San Fernando, which is actually one of my favourite places in Madrid. It's an indoor marketplace, but it's full of small little cafes and bars, and, well, you can't even call them restaurants. They're just little, like, shacks almost, just set up. It's always full of people, especially in the evening after hours. And I've just caught up with Alejandro, who runs a small bar called Los Panchitos del Frente. He doesn't speak in English, but he gave me his opinion about Yolanda Díaz's proposals.
Creo que cambiaría todo. O sea,
No, this would mean changing everything, Alejandro told me. I really can't get my head around this. I mean, in the summer, it's still daylight at 10 p.m, and we have a big culture of bars and restaurants, and they're always full, so I just can't understand this. I asked Alejandro whether he understood the idea with regards to staff.
El camarero va a preferir cerrar antes. El que es camarero va a preferir cerrar antes y el que es...
Okay, yes, from the point of view of workers, they'd love to close early, he told me. They may want to close early, but the owners want to stay up late. Waiters don't want to finish at 3 in the morning. They'd obviously prefer to end at midnight, so they can also enjoy some of the nightlife. On the surface, it seems like an impossible idea. As Laura, one of the clients I spoke to at the beginning, told me, this is part of Spanish heritage. But Yolanda Díaz has started a conversation and got people thinking. And once upon a time, not so long ago, if I'd wandered into my local bar and told everyone there that there would come a time when they couldn't smoke their cigarettes inside the bar, they would have all happily laughed me out. Ashish Sharma, DW, Madrid.
Next to Italy, where a taxi war has been simmering for years. In the big cities Rome, Milan and Naples, there are too few taxis. And especially during the tourist season, finding a taxi is a nightmare. Long queues at stations and airports, impossible waiting times to make a phone booking. The government believes that the closed market should be open to other providers, such as Uber, and that more taxi permits should be issued. The taxi industry, however, is fiercely resisting, regularly shutting down cities with strikes and protests, as Angelo van Schaik reports.
Benvenuto in IT Taxi. La chiamata sarà gestita dalla struttura radiotaxi.
Ordering a taxi in Rome is a matter of patience. Even on a normal weekday, you often have to wait a very long time. There are way too few taxis in the city. According to the local authorities, 1,500 new taxi permits should be issued as soon as possible. But Loreno Bittarelli, the owner of Rome's biggest taxi company, doesn't agree.
Su Roma siamo circa 7.800.
There are about 7,800 taxis in Rome. At peak times, that's not enough. At other times, that's too many. However, we're against issuing 1,500 new permits. That's way too much. The city of Rome has no idea what it would mean for traffic if there were suddenly 1,500 extra taxis.
Arriverà in 11 minuti, Catania 22.
Sì, è un po' tanto, però va bene.
Salve a lei.
Arrivederci.
After more than 15 minutes, my taxi has finally arrived.
Testa nuovo di zecca proprio.
Buonasera, dove dobbiamo andare?
Alla stazione Termini.
Perfetto, va bene.
Marco Massullo has been a taxi driver in Rome for almost 30 years. After his grandfather and his father, he's the third generation to drive around the Italian capital.
Ho cercato di evitarla all'inizio perché speravo di fare qualcosa.
At first, I didn't want to become a taxi driver. I wanted to do something else with my life because I saw that it was a tough job. But every now and again, I replaced my dad when he was ill. So at a certain point, I decided to invest.
At first, Marco hesitates to answer the question on how much he paid for his taxi permit.
Back in 1994, I invested 110 million lira. That's around 120,000 euros. A lot of money. And to be honest, I don't know whether I would do the same thing again today. I don't know whether it's worth it. 25 years ago, we protested against liberalizing the taxi market, and today, we're still doing the same thing.
At the end of November, taxi drivers shut down Rome. They were protesting against Uber entering the Italian market and issuing new permits. Taxi boss Bittarelli supported the protest.
We're
in favor of increasing the number of permits, but only for 300 in Rome. More is madness.
In Italy, taxi drivers are all self-employed. The permit is personal and tied to a car. Permits cost a lot of money and are quite a nest egg. A taxi driver can sell the permit when he retires for approximately the amount he bought it for. The high price for the permit is difficult to reconcile with, according to the tax authorities, the low amounts of money taxi drivers make.
Signor Mantovani?
Vieni sul primo piano?
Primo piano.
Roberto Mantovani has been a taxi driver in Bologna since 2016. He thinks it's the most beautiful job in the world. But on a local radio station he says not everyone agrees with that.
Bisogna raccontare la favola dei poveri tassisti.
We have to continue to tell the tale of how tough a taxi driver's life is, and that we don't make much money. We have to complain, because when there are talks with the government, we have to point out that there's nothing else to take away from us, that we're poor.
Well, according to the tax authorities, taxi drivers do make very little money. On average in Rome, just 14,000 euros a year. In Milan, a bit more. In Naples, half of that, 7,000 euros a year. Those are starvation wages. But Roberto disagrees.
Sì, sembra così, dai dati che forniamo all'Agenzia delle Entrate.
It looks like we're starving. According to this data, an Italian taxi driver wouldn't be able to buy groceries, buy a new car, or even pay for petrol. But that is clearly nonsense.
This is Roberto's taxi, Bologna 5. Just a normal white Volkswagen Golf.
Ho iniziato esattamente il primo.
Last year, I started to publish my daily revenue on Twitter, how much I make during my shift, which part is cash and which part is paid for by credit card. All hell broke loose. The whole industry came after me. I was a traitor, a disgrace to the trade. One night, 2 colleagues punctured the tyres of my taxi, and I have it all on video.
Roberto was suspended by his dispatch.
Significa che io non ho I servizi della cooperativa.
It means that I don't receive any calls from the dispatch, so I work a lot less. I can pick up people from the train station or the airport, but that's about it. It means that I make less than half what I normally make. Personally, I think it's strange the taxi company chose to side with the tax evaders and not with the honest taxi driver.
It's a normal weekday evening at Termini train station in Rome, and at the taxi stand there are at least 150, if not 200 people waiting in line for one. But although he admits there's a problem, taxi driver Marco Massullo doesn't think liberalizing the taxi market is the solution.
Io sono contrario per 2 motivi. Il primo è personale.
For several reasons. Customers who believe that liberalization will improve the service are often disappointed. In general, costs will rise and the service becomes worse. In a liberalized market, the large multinationals call the shots and destroy things. That'll happen in our sector as well, and I don't want that. I'd like to preserve some of my own dignity.
The Italian taxi market is a closed one, and notwithstanding pressure from the European Union, it's very likely to stay that way. The current right-wing Italian government has always been in favor of protecting guilds like taxi drivers and pharmacists. So getting a cab in Rome will probably continue to be a nightmare.
Grazie, buonasera.
Grazie, buona serata.
Angelo van Schaik, DW, Rome.
Still to come on Inside Europe, how 19th century Dutch dome prisons have been repurposed for refugees, tourism and to advance social change. And a reminder, you're welcome to message us with your thoughts on any of these reports. Drop a line to insideeurope@dw.com and we'll be back in touch. This is Inside Europe and I'm Nick Martin in Germany. Finally this week, most people have never been inside a prison, whether locked up, visiting an inmate or working as a guard. Certainly not to play games, have a workout, a bite to eat and a beer. In the Netherlands, you can do all that and more. David Kattenberg begins his report in Breda, in the southern part of the country.
This is amazing.
For me, not. I worked here 20 years.
We're walking into a cell. It's a small cell at the Arnhem Koepel, a big red brick dome in this eastern Dutch city that used to be a prison. The Arnhem Koepel is one of 3 such domes, or panopticons, here in the Netherlands. A panopticon is a prison where inmates can be observed by a single guard standing on a tower in the middle. Arnhem's dome was built in 1885. The last inmates left in 2015. Since then, Arnhem's Koepel has been repurposed. Martin is a former guard. He gives guided tours.
The guard in that time climbed to the top of the tower. They ring a bell, so the prisoners had to come to the door, and he looked around 360 degrees, and he had seen all prisoners.
Arnhem's Koepel was not the most comfortable place to be jailed or work. Cold in the winter, hot in the summer, especially on the top range. Costa del Sol, inmates called it. So this was a cell.
This was an original cell. Toilet, wash place, lights, mirror.
Lots of echo. Go downstairs and clap your hands.
In the time that I worked here, you get punished when you shout, because when one person shouts, everybody else shouts, and you get insane inside.
These days, visitors are welcome to shout, especially kids.
The little people from school, they're coming here, they all shout, and then they say, go in the center, shout, 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 and then we stop.
While school kids raise a ruckus in the Arnhem Koepel, grown-ups do their own thing.
So they come for meetings, workout days. In the summer we offer them fitness, badminton or tennis, and then come here to eat and drink and relax.
The Arnhem Koepel was designed by Dutch architect Willem Metselaar, based on drawings by 18th century British philosopher Jeremy Bentham. Bentham's ideas about social control in a prison where everyone sees everyone else were avant-garde at the time. Here in the city of Haarlem, home to another Metselaar Koepel, the concept is still avant-garde.
Whatever RNW Media does is not ordinary. To hold a speech in a prison, that alone in a prison in Holland.
Alessandra Gasparotto works with RNW Media, a youth media accelerator with offices here.
The dome has been reshaped to host a different type of organizations right now. So in this same building there are offices of organizations that work for social change. There is the whole structure that has been built to offer space for offices.
We step out here and in the middle of the Koepel there was a tower.
Correct.
One guard in theory could watch everybody.
Yeah, now there is a cinema, which is amazing, downstairs.
Alessandra takes me to a cell that's now an office.
We can close the door. It's a very heavy door. The sound travels very well across cells. So I do wonder sometimes when I'm sitting inside, how did they used to communicate?
What's it like working in the Koepel in an old prison? Is it kind of creepy?
For some people it is. For me personally, not. I do like to see how we managed to get rid of a prison, which is also a very positive sign.
An hour's trip south of Haarlem, in the city of Breda, I'm standing in front of Willem Metzelar's third kupol. Several hundred Ukrainian refugees live here, and no visitors are allowed. So I go to City Hall to talk about the Breda kupol's history. Mark Behrens knows a lot about this. 4 Nazis were locked up there, he says. The most notorious, Joseph Katala, deputy commander of Amersfoort concentration camp east of Amsterdam, the executioner of Amersfoort, they called him.
He was the typical Nazi. He was the one clipping free the dog and send it to the Jews. So he actually committed real crimes.
Joseph Katala died in his cell in the Breda kupol in 1979. At least one inmate, a much less notorious woman, managed to escape.
She used a spoon and she excavated underneath the foundation of the building and she got out. And it took about half a year before she was found again.
Not as dramatic as the Shawshank Redemption.
Really not that dramatic.
Breda kupol may host lots of drama in years to come after its Ukrainian residents have moved on.
So I'm going to use an example which is actually not on the table. If you could ask Cirque du Soleil to make a circus here, an indoor circus like they have in Las Vegas, that could attract people from all over this country, all over Belgium. It's not going to be Cirque du Soleil, but a party like that would be really great.
Much less great, life for Ukrainian refugees residing in Breda's kupol today. I sat down with a pair of former residents at Breda Public Library.
Но потом, когда ты осознаешь, в каком ты помещении находишься, то охватывает ужас.
Serhiy lived in the Breda kupol for a year, sharing a cell with another Ukrainian he did not know at first. Serhiy's wife and young daughter shared a cell upstairs. A friend interprets.
First time when you got in a room, calm and quiet, without any war, but after that you realize that it's in fact a former prison, it becomes really strange. You have a small windows with the bars, and you have a security regime in this place, kind of a prison. Anyway, so it's strange.
Strange, but the Dutch folks running Breda's kupol were very kind, Serhiy says. Serhiy's wife agrees. Still, life was hard.
People in the kupol, Ukrainian people, sometimes doing drugs, sometimes doing alcohol, and they do the conflicts. And you always thinking, okay, what will I find in this shower today? Sometimes I will not speak about it.
What better reason to escape for a day? Serhiy and his family were free to do so. Back in Arnhem, people paid escape its old panopticon. Former guard Martin explains.
We play games, Escape Dome, and I do tours with 3 colleagues.
Escape Dome?
Yeah, you get a cell with 2 guys and you have to escape, and you can open the door from the inside and then you go to the next room, and when you walked to 5 cells, you get a note and then you escape and then go downstairs and could change it for a beer.
Escape Dome can be played by up to 90 people, paying €20 each. You get an hour to escape. Book yourself into a cell at the Arnhem Kupol Dome at prisonexperience.nl. David Kattenberg, DW in the Netherlands.
And as well as our rebroadcasters around the world, Inside Europe continues to gain traction on podcast platforms. Just hit the subscribe button and give us a review, as it will help to promote our show to other listeners. This programme was produced by Helen Seeney and sound engineer Thomas Schmidt. And I'm Nick Martin. Thanks for listening. Inside Europe comes to you from DW in Germany.